Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our August webinar on the subject for this webinar is going to be overtaking. This evening we have panelists of James Quinn and Lynn Weston. If you'd just like to give us a brief introduction about yourself, James.
Been an ADI since 1988, head of training for ADI and JC, teach learner drivers, also teach driving instructors to become driving instructors and help them improve and get through standards checks.
Thank you very much, James. And we have Lynn Weston. If you'd just like to give a little bit of an introduction to yourself as well.
Hi, good evening. I've been a driving instructor for 30 years. During that time I was also an examiner for 3.5 years. I'm a committee member for the ADI and JC. I'm on their training team. That's about it, thank you.
Right, brilliant, thank you. I'm Ed Marshall as well. I'm on the General Committee for the ADI and JC as well, part of the training team, and obviously running these webinars as well. Just to notify everybody that this one is being recorded for the session. It will be going onto the website now. We've got all that set up so we can put these webinars straight onto the webinar, so you can have a listen to them again or get people to have a listen to it if they're interested in this. So it'll be on for a month until the next webinar, and then that one's going to go into the archive where members will be able to view all the other webinars as well that we've had. On the control panel just over to your right hand side, we have a panel there where you'll be able to ask questions and the little question box. And if you've got any questions as we go through the evening, ask questions and I'll fire those off to the panel and see if we can get those answered for you. And so the next slide is the goals for this session. So this webinar, we're going to help you to try and understand the term overtaking. It's something that we've been discussing as the training team and thought people quite often misunderstand overtaking and how it can be marked on the exam, on the test. Linda, being an examiner, has got some really good experience of marking the tests and how overtaking is marked. So if anybody's got any questions to do with that, fire away and we can ask them there. We're looking at when and where to overtake and the how. And then we're going to look at comparing the roadcraft way, which is IPSCA, versus the more traditional way that the DVSA like us to teach it with position, speed, look, and then mirror signal maneuver. So that's the order that we're running things through tonight. And the first one is what's meant by the term overtaking. And we've basically got 4 different ways that we can overtake. We've got the traditional overtaking on the right, which would be where you're approaching a moving vehicle, it's travelling slower than you, you've got a high enough speed differential and clear and safe road ahead, and you're just going to proceed on by overtaking on the right. We're looking at overtaking on the left. Yeah, when can you overtake on the left? That might be an interesting one for you to come up with questions, or if we say anything different to what your thought process is on overtaking on the left and what it is. We've got passing on the right. Yeah, so when are we passing on the right rather than overtaking? And passing on the left. Now, a lot of these are going to be explained further as we go through this evening as well, but basically passing on the right, we're having a little bit of a chat just before, and Linda was testing us, I think, see how we determine different things. Passing on the right is where you're not passing anything that's moving. An overtake is where you're passing something that is moving. Yeah, whereas passing on the right is what you might commonly term as meeting situations as well, where the object that you're going past is stationary. Passing on the left is slightly different to overtaking on the left. Where you're passing on the left, you're going past something that's stationary, maybe a stationary vehicle that's wanting to turn right, and you go past them on the left rather than overtake them on the left. If the vehicle that was turning right was actually moving, that would be then classed as an overtake on the left rather than a pass on the left. So we've got different terms going through there, and James is having, oops, that didn't meant to go on there.
Are you going to quiz us on them?
Sorry, James. Quiz on the end.
They're all sounding complicated. Are you going to quiz them on us?
Oh, no, I'm not. I ran out of time to actually do some polls, actually. I was going to do a poll for this and see how much people had taken on board at the end of it, but I just ran out of time to get that one in.
Ed.
Yes, Lynn.
Ed, can I just make a comment on the passing on the right?
Yes.
That would probably come under clearance.
Oh, right.
When you're passing a stationary vehicle, it would come under clearance. It would be a meet situation if there was a stationary vehicle on the left and you were passing it and there was an oncoming vehicle. So
yeah.
If we've got a stationary vehicle on its own, we're passing on the right and that would be clearance. If we've got a stationary vehicle and an oncoming vehicle, that would be a meet situation.
Right. Yep. So that makes perfect sense. I get that. Yep. Lovely. Thanks for that clarification. And have either of you, James or Lynn, got anything more you want to add to anything that I've just said on that slide?
No.
No. Right. Okay. So, when and where to overtake? James, I'm going to leave this one over to you.
So kind of you.
I know.
As it says on the screen, first thing to do is really make an assessment. We never have to overtake, so it's always a conscious decision to actually take for the process of overtaking, and it's using, as it says, position, speed, gear and look. So we need to think about our position. One of the common mistakes that you'll see many drivers making with position is to get up close behind the vehicle that they want to overtake and then pull out, and they're really creating two problems for themselves. One is their vision is very poor, and the second is that they're going to be trying to accelerate on a curved path, and it's far easier accelerating in a straight line. So in relation to position, you really want to get out towards the right and get the best view you can, and providing it's safe, I'd say really go as far as you need towards the right to make sure it is safe, to make sure you've got the view. If as you're moving towards the right you see anything that you don't like, then you obviously move back towards the left. But in relation to position, quite early on, get a good view, checking in your mirrors as well. I mean, it hasn't got mirrors on there, but making sure it's safe behind. You position it towards the right to make sure it's safe ahead. Then in relation to speed, it's thinking about your speed and your acceleration capability, and so that's where the gear comes in. And I don't know whether Lynn wants to come in here in relation to some of the things in relation to gear and driving tests, or do you want me to carry on?
I'll let you carry on, James. I'll bring that up later. Yeah, I know. Okay. I know what you're referring to.
Okay, so it's thinking about our speed so that we can overtake, so we can get past the other vehicle and back into a safe position, and it's thinking about our acceleration as well. So we want to select a gear that has given us the power to get past the other vehicle as efficiently as possible. So it's given us the acceleration, but a gear also that we're not hopefully going to need to make another gear change in the process of overtaking. So it's one gear that will do the whole job. The looking, it's despite the fact that we have MSM and PSL implying that they're done as separate things, the looking needs to be a constant thing all the way through. So right from the position to get that look, but we're looking continually to make sure that it is safe and nothing changes. And we really need to be willing to abort the overtake right up until the point that really it's too late. So really, I suppose, up until we are actually level with the other vehicle, we need to keep looking, and if necessary, hit the brakes and drop back in behind them if we see anything at all that we don't like. Going back up to, is it going to be safe and legal? The legal, I think, is going to come in on other points. Do you want me to cover anything on that at the moment, Ted? Or should I leave that to the highway?
We can leave that out now. I think you've got quite a lot on there. I've just put another few bullet points coming up on there that sort of come into the safe part. Sorry, I've got a fly buzzing around now. I've just come up on those bullet points.
Okay, so assessing the speed of the vehicle to overtake, the there's actually going to be two different types of overtake we could do. One could be when we can't overtake immediately, so we have to come up to a vehicle, sit behind them, and then pull out and look for an opportunity to overtake. The other one would be when we are able to do it all in one move, so we're gaining on a vehicle and we can see far enough ahead and we're able to just continue really at the speed we're going. So we end up with differences perhaps in the need to assess the speed of the vehicle that we are overtaking.
Do you have a different term for that one? You know what when you're coming up behind a vehicle, James, and you're having to sit behind it and then move out. Do you have a special term? I know we do in our advanced driving group. We have a term for that. Do you have a term for it?
I can't think of one. Enlighten me.
Box overtake. So when you're coming up behind, when you're looking at considering the position and you've checked your mirrors to get a position, it's a slide out to the right without acceleration, holding the same speed, looking out for the overtake, and then if it's clear, accelerating in a straight line. And if it's not, then sliding back in to regain your position. The only thing there you have a disadvantage with the box overtake is that if the person behind closes the gap in where you've left. So it's quite a tricky one. I think it's one of the more difficult ones is the box overtake.
One of the possible solutions for that, though, could be to not be too close to the vehicle in front. That way, if you move out and the vehicle behind you tries to close the gap, you've still got somewhere to go to.
Yeah,
you absolutely.
Yeah. I just wasn't aware whether everybody knew that term box overtake or whether it was specific to our group.
I've heard the description, but I hadn't heard that term.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd agree with the description.
Yeah.
No, I hadn't heard that term.
Okay, sorry about that.
What else haven't we covered? Assessing bends, brows of hills and humped bridges. Hopefully that is stating the obvious, that it's really looking not only at the areas that we can see, but also thinking about the areas that we can't see. Can something appear? And I suppose in that sense we could also maybe include any openings, so any side road, any driveway, anything hidden behind parked vehicles or any other obstructions. So really
the reason I included those three as that one point there is that's actually Rule 166 that we're covering all in one bullet point there. Bends, brows of hills and humpback bridges, those are your assessment, but I think those actually lead quite nicely. The assessment of the oncoming gap, the speed of the vehicles and this of the actual layout of the road leads us quite nicely into this next one. If that's come up on your screen, there you go, James. I'll let you carry on with this one because that sounded quite interesting what you were talking about. You've been doing a few maths and sums on this one. Enlighten us on your sums.
Okay. If you take an example, you're on a 60-mile-an-hour road. You've got a car ahead of you that is doing 50 miles an hour, and we're doing 60. We're not going to do a box overtake. We're just going to go straight past because we can see ahead that it's clear. From the point we reach, from the point our front bumper reaches the other car's back bumper, to actually clear the other car and pull back in, allowing a 6-car length gap to the car we've just overtaken, we will have travelled either 214.6 metres or, in old money, 704 feet. If we now add another complication, and there is an oncoming car coming towards us doing 60 miles an hour but some way away, to still clear the car that we're overtaking and pull in 6 car lengths away from that, and also still be 6 car lengths away from the oncoming vehicle that is doing 60 miles an hour when we pull in, we'll need to have a gap between us and the oncoming vehicle of 670.6 metres. But if you want it in feet, 2,200 feet, which is roughly 0.4 miles. That gap, 6 car lengths between us and an oncoming vehicle, is going to be cutting it extremely fine, and personally I wouldn't feel very comfortable with that. So our stopping distance, our advised stopping distance at 60 miles an hour, is actually 18 car lengths. So to again clear this 50-mile-an-hour car, to overtake them, give them 6 car lengths, and have 18 car lengths between us and the vehicle coming towards us. Our starting gap between us and the oncoming vehicle needs to be 992.4 metres, or 3,256 feet, or 0.6 miles. Quite a long way.
It's a massive.
And that, of course, is giving, meaning we pull over with 18 car lengths between us and the oncoming vehicle, which is our stopping distance at 60. But bear in mind, we've got 2 vehicles approaching one another at 60. So in many respects, you could actually say we should have an even bigger gap.
Yeah, well, that last bullet point on there, 2 vehicles closing at a speed of 120 miles an hour, i.e. 2 people doing 60 miles an hour, that's 54 metres per second, that closing gap. So that's quite something there. Now, there was a lot of complicated maths there, so it really is a good job that we're recording these and putting them up on the website, because I think you might have to just get a pen and paper and write those down. So these slides go up, and you can see all the slides. So these figures that are on the slide are out there on the website for you to look for the next month. When you get time, you flick through it. You can fast forward through it. So if you take note now, we started at 8 o'clock, so it's 17 minutes in. So if you use the slide bar, you can actually fast forward to this position on the webinar. So roughly about 16 to 17 minutes in at the moment. Yeah. So we've had 1 or 2 things just coming in on the questions as well. We have one person that uses ready, aim, fire for when they're doing overtaking. That's quite a good one, that, Dave. That's from David Allen. Richard Golding's put in hidden dips, dead ground. Yeah, you've got to consider those as well. We have an area near us that has a lot of that sort of ground, and it really does have to be considered quite carefully when you are making an overtake, whether there's hidden dips that are hiding other traffic. So that's a good point there, Richard. Thanks for that. Okay, and that's that for. I think we've got no more questions like that. Nope, we haven't. So, anything to add to that, Lynn? Are you happy with everything that's gone on there?
Very complicated maths for this time of night.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it? Well done, James, for that. How long did it take you to do that lot?
Not too long. It's amazing what Excel can do, but it is really then just going through the logical process of what gap do we actually need. Yes.
Yeah. Right, Lynn. Sorry, go on, James.
Can I add just to add one more thing? That calculation was based on us already doing 60 mile an hour and the vehicle we're passing doing 50. If we were having to accelerate, it would obviously take far longer. So again, we would need an even bigger gap because we're having to build our speed up as well. So it is, when you start working around it, it can actually be quite frightening just how big a gap we need to do some overtakes.
Yeah, well, it's actually quite a good point because that hidden dip one that actually Richard's pointed out there, we have an area near us that if you're quick with it, you can get an overtake in on one that's doing 50 miles an hour. I had a pupil today who went for the overtake halfway down the straight on an HGV. So then you've got the extra length that you have to consider there as well. So that's going to take a little bit longer, and they were about to go for it. And we had quite an interesting conversation afterwards about the reasons why I said, no, we're not having that one. We'll stay here. Thank you very much. Plus, I knew the HGV was turning left up ahead of us. So there was little point in overtaking. And that's something we didn't consider in considering the overtake. It's actually working out whether the overtake is going to be worth it as well. Have you got a speed limit ahead? Are there things there? Are you following a vehicle that's going to turn into a field or something like that? Is the overtake actually worth it in the first place, or is there a load of traffic in front? Sometimes I do consider overtaking HGVs simply to get in front of them for my own view. If there's room to go around an HGV and get back in front of him comfortably, I'd sooner sit in front of him than behind him, although some of them do travel rather closely, and sometimes you wonder which is the best, lack of view or an HGV full of mirror. Yeah, so consideration has to be taken into account there. But we'll give you a go now, Lynn. Yes.
Ed, that would probably lead on quite well to the platooning one you're going to do next time, actually.
Yes, it will actually. Yeah, well, fingers crossed. Yeah, the platooning one that we're coming up with next. That's quite an interesting one. Did you see the conversation on the new Facebook group about platooning as well? So hopefully there'll be some questions answered about that, where cars cut in between the HGVs.
Ed, do you know what platooning is?
That's another good point. Platooning is the new technology that's coming into HGVs, where a string of HGVs will all run from the front one, connected by, is it Wi-Fi, James? I can't remember now. Bluetooth type technology, wasn't it? What Tony told us. So there's 6 wagons running together, and they're actually considering, if anybody's seen the new documents for autonomous vehicles, considering reducing the following distance below 2 seconds for these guys as well. And I don't know whether Tony was actually serious or not, but he said sometimes down to 6 meters at that meeting, wasn't it? So all to do with fuel efficiency and the new autonomous working. But we'll be having hopefully our next webinar on that one. We just need confirmation that Tony's available to help us with that. So quite an interesting one coming up. Lynn.
Yeah, that would tie in quite nicely with the overtaking, because it would be interesting trying to overtake all of that in one go.
Yeah, and if you're trying to get your car, which is 4 meters, into a 6 meter gap, that would be quite interesting if something else was coming towards you.
Yes. Well, hopefully it won't come towards us on the motorway on the M6. So I'm hoping that there'll be no cars coming towards me on the M6.
Right. Okay. So hopefully you can now see how to overtake cars, Lynn.
Right. So I'm going to be looking at this from an examining point of view, what the examiner would be looking for, the sort of things that an examiner would look for when you're overtaking. First of all, as Ed said, is it necessary? Do these people need to overtake? One thing that a lot of people don't take into account is overtaking a cyclist. That is actually an overtake manoeuvre. A lot of people think it's clearance, but it's not, it's an overtake. Because as we've said, anything moving is overtaking. The examiners will be looking to make sure that you are checking your mirrors and acting appropriately on what you see in the mirrors and what you see around you. That you're giving appropriate signals as and where necessary. So would you need to signal to go around a push bike? So that is, sometimes you would, sometimes you wouldn't. But they have to be able to make these decisions themselves and decide whether it's appropriate. The examiner will be looking to make sure that the candidates aren't cutting in too early, as James was saying earlier, making sure that there's plenty of clearance. Are they checking the correct mirrors before they're coming back in? Are they coming back in too soon because they're checking just a side mirror? Or are they waiting to check a middle mirror? So coming in with correct clearance. Yes, Ed?
Can I just come in on that one, Lynn? Because that was actually, we were talking about the when to come back in and how we actually decided. You asked a question, how do we decide when to come back in? And quite an interesting point that you were saying, that it seems as though a lot of people teach just to look at the left door mirror and use left door mirror judgment rather than using main mirror judgment.
Yeah, by coming in on the main mirror, we're going to be giving ourselves that safety gap. So hopefully we'll be coming in with a 2-second gap if you're using the middle mirror. And that's what we'll be looking for, is that they're clearing the vehicle that they're overtaking and coming in with the correct clearance, not cutting them up. We're also looking to make sure they're not attempting to overtake in a hazardous position. So, as we've just spoken about, dead ground, bends, junctions. They're all the things that the examiner will check for. So it's not necessarily a set procedure, but it's just that they are using common sense, really. They're using their mirrors, they're using their observations, and they're actually looking and seeing and making a judgment on what they're seeing. When they go for an overtake, as we've spoken about before, quite often they won't change down gear, so won't have acceleration, which is a really good point because they do need that acceleration to get going. If they just try and overtake in fifth gear, quite often the car will lose power. And this puts us in a nasty position. Likewise, sometimes when they change down gear, which I've had this happen to me, they may be going from fifth to third, but on one occasion I actually had someone go from fifth to first at 60 miles an hour, which was very interesting. So we actually virtually did an emergency stop. So it's just getting them confident going up and down these gears so they're confident to use the gears when they need to. And that's what the examiners are looking for, really. It's just that they have plenty of experience doing this.
Yep.
There's two different methods, which we're going to go over later, so we'll discuss the different methods later and the pros and cons for both.
Yeah. Yeah, covered all. I've just put the few bullet points up there, so it's good. Yeah, thank you. James, anything to add?
I don't think so.
No? Right. Okay. So that leads us into, horses. Yeah. What about horses then, Lynn? Did you come across many of those when you were out examining?
Yeah, I did actually. In one of the areas I used to examine, we did have a lot of so it was interesting. I had one that sticks in my mind where someone tried to overtake a horse and a parked car the opposite way, which I actually had to intervene at. That was interesting. But yeah, horses, we need to make sure that we're not accelerating past them. That's the whole difference with the horses, is that we don't want to be accelerating. We want to be going past very slowly, very steadily, not under acceleration. Because obviously we don't want to spook the horse, which is going to make the situation worse. And again, give good clearance once we go past, make sure we can see that horse in our central mirror, not the side mirror.
Yeah, I don't know about anybody else out there, but I used to ride horses and I've had quite a bit to do with horses all my life. One thing that I liked to see when I was riding was people that would go past with sort of low engine revs. I usually teach third gear around about no faster than 20 to 25 mile an hour. Just keeps the engine revs down, but yet gives you the pace to get past them. And most horses are quite happy with that. Especially coming from behind, because what people have to remember is that horses have that forward vision. They do see off to the side a little bit, but if you're directly behind them, they might not actually know you're there. So coming out nice and slow, nice and wide, so that horse can pick pick you up in their sight line. Also, if you approach a horse right from the very front as well, if you're a motorbike rider, make sure you're offset, because a horse can't actually see straight in front of its nose. I don't know what the field of vision where it actually comes round and sees, but we always used to approach horses from the side because they can see you better.
Well, that's really interesting, Ed. I didn't know that. I didn't know they couldn't see an oncoming motorbike if it was directly in front.
Yeah.
Oh,
So approaching from the side, is the best approach, and slightly offset. Yeah, and then the horses can see you. So. The do not overtake, Rule 165 of the Highway Code. The first bullet point on this one, I think, is often, and this you'll be quite familiar with this one in examining terms as well, and you can maybe help with this one. The do not cross or straddle a double white line with the solid line nearest to you, but see Rule 129 on this one. The exceptions being, obviously, the cyclist. And there's a lot of controversy about this one. Do we overtake cyclists doing more than 10 miles an hour?
Well, the legal ruling is that you shouldn't overtake anything that's doing more than 10 miles an hour. So if the vehicle, the cyclist, or a road maintenance vehicle is doing more than 10 miles an hour, then you shouldn't have to overtake it. It's if it's 10 miles an hour or less. Now, I'm not sure about cyclists, but the cyclists around here can go pretty fast. We've got some hills and they can go downhill pretty fast. So I certainly wouldn't want to be overtaking a cyclist if he was doing more than 10 miles an hour. Because remember, these double lines and white lines are there for a reason. There must be restricted visibility. So if you're, as James I'm sure will work out the figures, if the cyclist is doing more than 10 miles an hour, there's a lot you've got to cover a long way to get past him before you can safely get back in.
Yeah, yeah. Because there is a lot of things that I've heard in the past, and we've had some fairly good chats with pupils, and they're saying, oh, if it's just slightly more than 10 miles an hour and you can see clearly ahead and there's nothing in front of you, do you go past it or do you hold the traffic up? And I think that's something that everybody has to know, that this rule exists, and it's using fairly good common sense then as to at what point do you class that as a safe overtake or not. Leads to some really good, interesting conversations with people as to what would they do if they were in a rush, late for a meeting, going out, girlfriend sat at home, wife sat at home, waiting to be picked up. So I've had some quite interesting conversations with that particular rule there. If you would have to enter a designated divide in traffic, it's surrounded by a solid white line. So there's also good topic of conversation there. Ooh, why has that gone like that? Got my finger on the slide there. Sorry about that, guys. The nearest vehicle to a pedestrian crossing, especially when stopped. Obviously, we don't want to be overtaking vehicles, but one thing to remember on the approach to a pedestrian crossing is that the cyclists, that on the approach to a crossing, that you can overtake a cyclist when in the zigzag area on approach to it, that you don't have to wait while you've got through that one.
No, that's fine. That's correct, yeah, you can overtake a cyclist, and the reasoning behind that is that we have visibility through a cyclist. We can actually see the side of the crossing. So there could be an exception. There could be, if perhaps there was a particularly large bike and it was blocking our visibility, then we wouldn't want to overtake them. But that's where common sense comes in, and we've got to make that decision based on what we're actually seeing and whether we have visibility.
Yeah. So the other ones there, no overtaking signs, be aware of those. So good common sense ones there. If there's anything to add to that, either of you? No. Okay, James, back with you on. Oh no, we're not. We're still with me on this one. The do not overtake. If you might come into conflict with other road users, and this rule here, Rule 167, the do not overtake is where all the advice is for overtaking, whether we should actually, how we could interpret that into our own thoughts. There's a bit more tendency for leeway. It's not as clear as must not. So this one's a really good one for building scenarios with the learners, help engage them in the learning process on this one. So that's the rule 167. Have either of you got anything to add to that one?
I had an interesting scenario actually happened 2 weeks ago, probably now. We were following a cyclist. I was with a learner driver and they were following a cyclist, and we were actually discussing overtaking, and we were just talking about, I asked the pupil what was their opinion, when did they think it was safe to overtake, and they said, oh, I think we could go now, and I pointed out the road on the left, and as I pointed out the road on the left, a car came out forcing the cyclist to come out in front of us. So that was interesting, and it was just so timed well. It couldn't have been timed any better.
And the pupil turned around. The pupil turned around and said, how much did you pay then?
Yeah, very much so. So yeah, it's good to be building these scenarios with them, because when they actually happen, they take notice.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a particular bad section. It's not to do with overtaking, but it's one of those anticipation ones where we're going through an area in a small village near York, Dunnington, and you've got a series of S-bends that are very sharp, and you on the way to it, you actually pass the bus stops. So if you're taking particular notice, you'll notice that there could be a bus coming towards you when you get here. And I just happened just a couple of weeks ago to say, "Have you seen the bus stops?" Just as the nose of the bus came around the corner. Yeah, so that was like perfectly timed as well. So it's funny how sometimes that those sort of things come along. James, have you anything to add?
The only thing really to add to that is that it just does show that anticipation works, and that's why these situations where we appear to be psychic happen.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Right, I'll just go through one or 2 points, which is we've got some good input coming through on the questions side here. They're not so much as questions, but good points that we'll just add into this. Lee Brooks has put in that it's good to assess the behaviour of the target vehicle, watch what they're doing. So you sort of build a profile of the person that's driving in front and get to know whether they're slowing down, speeding up, are they an erratic driver? What age is the driver in front? Are they fully aware of what's going around? Do they even know you're there at the back of them? Something that we use in advanced driving, which I think you'd have to be very careful at what stage you actually teach this, but it's using a flashing headlight before an overtake. Have you come across that one, James, in the advanced driving that you've done?
I have come across it, but of course it has potential problems.
Yeah,
In there's so many different interpretations of what flashing headlights mean, who they're
absolutely.
aimed at, and in the well, yeah, it is something that has been suggested for in advanced driving, but
Yeah,
personally, I'd be wary of it.
we use a prolonged one, 3 seconds of headlight, so it's not a flash very quickly because that can sometimes was that a flash? Was it the headlights dipping over a dip? So we use a prolonged one
Yeah,
just to make the driver in front aware. We also use it more particularly on the box overtakes where we'll actually be in a position where we're slightly out, give the headlight warning, and then if we get a correct reaction from a vehicle in front, we'll then either proceed with the overtake or even hang back, depending on that reaction we get from the driver. So that's quite an interesting one when we're looking at the advanced driving stages.
I think
Um,
the reaction you get would be very important.
yes, yeah, that's the key thing that we emphasise with that one. That one I tend to do the training for when we're actually looking at more the higher levels of advanced driving, such as masters in IAM, or we're looking at gold level standard in ROSPA. So using it at the more or less the highest level. Um, it's a good one
I
from
don't.
Richard. Sorry, Lynn, go on.
I'm not. I'm not sure flashing the lights would be something we'd be teaching the learners.
No, no, definitely not. Like I said, it's more or less at the top level because some of the people that are on here might be in fleet. Yeah, they may be doing things with fleet and have people that have actually done quite a bit of training before. So they could be coming across people that have actually been involved with some advanced driving um, in those areas. I'd mainly stick to the flashing headlight with high level advanced driving as well, not sort of introducing it at the lower levels. Richard's brought up when we're just going back to the LGVs, when we're overtaking LGVs, something that's important to think about is there anything in front of the LGV that we can't actually see? Because it is possible that there could be a smaller vehicle or a motorbike in front of the LGV. And there's probably a reason, if they're not doing 50 now on the single carriageway roads, there's probably a reason in front of them that they can't get up to their speed. So that's quite a good consideration, Richard. Rules when overtaking the cyclist where there are double white lines. I think we've just covered that one. Do
The
people?
cyclist doing 9.9 miles an hour.
We always say 9.5 miles an hour. Yeah, yeah. And also another good one to think about when you're looking at the cyclists is I know this it's sort of a broader term, but anybody in Lycra, I would consider doing more of the higher speeds than sort of maybe granddad, grandma going down to the shops, yeah, with the shopping bags over each handlebar. So I think the consideration of who's actually on the bike, as much as we were talking about the behaviour of the vehicles in front, it's considering that person that's on the bikes. And especially the kids, the smaller kids, or whether the bike's actually going to go around potholes in the road and those sort of things. Do people encourage running commentary? I personally do, because I get to find out what the driver's actually thinking. Even with learner drivers, I get them to give me a little bit of an idea, especially if we're following something large as well. Because if we're following large vans or wagons, quite often as a trainer, we're restricted with our vision, that we can't see anything unless we've got a nice kind road that we can see around the bends before we actually get to the overtake. And considering bends for overtaking, I always promote the fact that if it's a right-handed corner, yeah, that you're going to get an early sight line and get an advantage of a position for seeing as you come off a right-handed bend. They're quite often the best places that will lead to a straight maybe after the bend. You get an extra kick into seeing what's going on ahead. So running commentary, I quite promote that. Do you two use running commentary with your trainees?
Yes, I think it's a great idea to help them develop their planning, their awareness, and in some cases help us clarify what they're thinking. But it helped mainly to help them really plan better, anticipate better.
Yeah.
Yep. I use it. Not all the time, because some pupils are really uncomfortable with it. But the ones that are comfortable with it, yeah, I do use it.
Yeah, I think that's an important fact there, Lynn, that some people aren't comfortable with it, are they?
No.
Yeah. With advanced driving, I use a fake overtake to have a look before. I think that's where we were talking about the positioning and using the box overtake, where you actually move out sideways. So, yeah, that can also help attract the driver in front and get their attention that you may be going to overtake as well. Right.
Interesting.
Okay.
Describing it, calling it a fake overtake.
It is an interesting term. I've not come across that. What's that? Robin, if you could just come back in that one, is that something is it a term that you've picked up from somebody else, or where have you come across that term, fake overtake? Just give us an idea. Okay. Right, James, I think we're back to you. I can get my slides to work. There we go. Roadcraft, which is what we've just been talking about, the advanced driving. I know, James, you've done your advanced driving, same as what I have. So Roadcraft, how does that, the IPSCA, slightly different to the MSPSL or the PSL MSM routine that we use? Give us your take on that.
While it's different, if IPSCA is done well, it's done properly, and MSM, PSL, whichever order you want to put it in, is done well and done properly, it's very difficult to see the difference between them. Thinking about the mirror signal maneuver routine, that routine implies that we check the mirrors, we give a signal, and then we actually move. But in reality, quite often we'll need to be making several mirror checks, maybe sometimes delaying a signal, so we could be checking the mirrors 2 or 3 times, maybe even more, before we put a signal on. Maybe then again to see how people have responded to that signal. So MSM and PSL are in many respects an oversimplification of what a good driver would really do. The roadcraft system, the position and speed obviously correspond to the position and speed of MSM PSL. The gear needs to go in to match the speed or to be suitable for the speed or for acceleration, and while it's not actually labelled in MSM PSL, it needs to be there. Excuse me. And then at the end, we've got the acceleration away from the hazard or through the hazard, in this case with overtaking, to accelerate past the vehicle to be overtaken. And that's what needs to be there in MSM PSL as well, even though it's not actually given a label in it. Going back to the beginning of the system, of information received and given, that's where the mirrors and signal comes in. And in many respects, the way roadcraft terms it, of information, not actually at the beginning, but running through the whole part of it, through the whole routine. So it isn't information and then followed by position, speed, gear, accelerate. It's information running all the way through, from before, during the position, speed, gear and accelerate part, and afterwards. And so it's actually more accurate to what a good driver would really be doing, because it's continually looking ahead, it's continually checking the mirrors, it's continually deciding whether we need a signal, or even whether to cancel a signal or to reapply one. And it's also, in many respects, covering the look part of the PSL, because again, the implication of PSL is that we do everything else and then look, even though the reality is that we're needing to look throughout it. So in many respects, roadcraft system is more accurate to what a good driver would really be doing. But like I said at the beginning, it's, if you actually look at someone using the roadcraft system well, or using the MSM and PSL systems well, there isn't really a difference between them.
No, that's really well put, that, James. I personally do like using the information, position, speed, gear, accelerate routine, and I find that learners tend to pick up on that one quite a bit easier, because I use this system with learners. And I don't know, people just find this one a lot easier when we're talking about this, because of the system that it uses. It does tend to fit a lot better, rather than the MSPSL. And I always give the learners a choice and explain that there are two different ways of doing it. And like you say, both used well are equally as good as each other. But I think this is a lot more flexible. I think this has got flexibility within it more than what the other routine has.
I think sorry, Lynn.
Sorry, I was just going to comment and say the MSPSL doesn't have to be used in MSPSL or PSL MSM routine. We can actually, and what I encourage mine to do, is actually use the roadcraft method, but by referring to it as MSPSL, by saying look first. So I start with the look, which is the information received and given, then make the decision on the position, speed, the gear for the speed. So I'm using both methods really and intertwining them.
Yeah.
Yeah, in some ways, I think MSM is trying to give an oversimplified version of the reality of what we need to do. For something very simple, check your mirrors, signal, and then do it. It's fine. But for the amount of times it actually needs adapting, because we're turning left and there's a parked car just before the turn. So how do we adapt it so that we don't check our mirrors, put a left signal on, and then move right to go around the parked car? It needs adapting so much that the roadcraft system, information, position, speed, gear, accelerate, is really just more accurate to what we do, and it's open to interpretation and flexibility, adaptation.
Yep. Right. Brilliant. Okay, just want to go back into here. We have right, the fake overtake is actually something that Robin picked up when he was doing ROSPA. Some of the police drivers, they sometimes use it. I've not come across that, and I've had quite a bit to do with police drivers. So whether that's particular to your area, Robin, that might be something in your training area with the police. Around North Yorkshire and Cumbria, I've not heard that one. I'll have a word with one of them I'm going out for a drive with in a couple of weeks' time, actually. So I'll check that one out, see if I can remember to talk about that one. And we have a question here that I think might be more appropriate for... I'll direct this one at you then. When approaching a vehicle waiting to turn right, with a 24/7 cycle lane on the left, with a broken line that would allow you to pass on the left, would you be penalised for checking the centre and left mirrors for cyclists, then utilising the cycle lane to pass the stationary vehicle?
Did he say broken white line?
Yeah, broken white line. A broken cycle lane line.
Can you repeat that, Ed, so
Yeah,
I can draw it as you're saying?
Yeah. So you're approaching a vehicle waiting to turn right. So I presume you're coming from behind. Vehicle in front of you turning right. You've got a 24/7 cycle lane on the left with broken line bordering it that would allow a pass on the left. Would you be penalised for checking centre and left mirrors for the cyclist, then using, if there's no cyclists in that lane, yeah, so we're assuming there's nothing to our left after checking the mirrors, would you be penalised for using the lane to pass a stationary vehicle waiting to turn right?
Right, so a lot of this is going to be determined by what the flow of the oncoming traffic is. The vehicle waiting to turn right, how long it's going to be waiting there, the volume of traffic behind you, whether you're holding up traffic. So if you were holding up a considerable amount of traffic, there's a lot of oncoming traffic and the vehicle in front isn't going to be turning, we've been waiting there for a period of time, then we may have to consider using it. But in general, no, I wouldn't go into that cycle lane.
Right,
I wouldn't check the mirror and go into that cycle lane. That's not.
Yeah, that's interesting, because that's a different answer that I would have given. Given that scenario with a stationary vehicle turning right, okay, we haven't got the information about oncoming traffic, but I would presume there is oncoming traffic that's going to be stationary for a while. I would check my left mirror and go into the cycle lane if there wasn't anything there and the road was wide enough to get through.
It depends on its time. How long you're holding up traffic, how much traffic you're holding up. You've got to assess every situation. There's never a black and white answer. Most answers are grey, unfortunately.
Yeah. But this is an interesting one. Even if there was no traffic behind me, Lynn, if there was nothing at all, but that vehicle in front was waiting to turn right and was going to be there a while, I would still consider going into that cycle lane. Would I be wrong?
Isn't there a difference between it being a broken white line and a solid white line, though?
Yes, there is. Yeah, solid white line. Yeah, this is a broken white line.
Yeah, a broken white line you can consider going into, but again, it's not something I would do instantly, and I wouldn't expect them to just check their mirror and go straight round that vehicle. I would expect them to think about it, assess the situation, and then go. If that vehicle's going to obviously be stationary for a long period of time, then yes, I would do it. But if it's only hesitating, waiting for a gap, then why do that?
That's an interesting point. I've learned something tonight. Yeah, so every day's a school day. Go on, James, you were going to say something.
No, that was covered. I was just querying it. I'd have done the same as you would, Ed, on the basis that it was a broken white line.
Yeah.
But I can understand Linda's point as to how long you're going to be waiting for. Would that same point be in relation to a bus lane then? Would you be allowed to go into a bus lane to undertake?
No, definitely not. No.
Definitely not. The cycle lane, as long as it is a broken line, then yes, you can at some point make a move. But you've got to use assessment. You've got to think. You can't just check your mirror and go straight round a vehicle. You do need to look, make sure you've thought about it. How long is this vehicle going to be stationary for? It's the same as we were talking about earlier. Do we need to overtake, whether it be on the left or the right? Do we need to do that overtake? Is it necessary?
In some cases, though, that assessment might be able to be done on the move, approaching it, because you can see a long stream of oncoming traffic, so you know that a vehicle in front is going to be waiting some time.
If you've made the assessment on the move, and as you say, the visibility is good, you can see that there's going to be waiting for a long period of time, it's a broken line, and you have got good visibility behind you, you haven't got a blind spot that a cyclist could be in, then yes.
Yeah. Right, interesting. Right, thank you for that. I hope that's answered your question there, Adrian. If you could just give us a yes or a no on that one for the cycle lane there. That was quite a good discussion, that. Thank you. Right. Yeah, somebody else agreeing that IPSCA, they prefer that one. They use it instead of MSPSL. Yeah. I'd like to ask, why does everyone now seem to signal left? Yeah, that's quite an interesting one that I have discussions with. I'd like to ask, why does everyone now seem to think to signal left to return to their own side of the carriageway after passing a vehicle? So, could you just clarify this one, Lee, for us, please? Are you talking about on a dual carriageway, or are you talking about single carriageway? Because I can see advantages of sometimes signalling left to return back to the left lane or lane one. But if you're talking about a single carriageway, and I'm going to ask this one to you, Lynn. If you've done an overtake and you're returning back to your side of the carriageway, how would it be marked if somebody gave a signal to return back into the left?
As long as it's not a misleading signal, there is no mark there at all.
No, no.
The mark coming back onto the dual carriageway, the reason a lot of people don't signal for that now is, especially on dual carriageways, is there's quite often roads that go off on the left.
Yeah.
So if you signal to come back round a parked vehicle, for instance, or even a moving vehicle, and there is a road coming out from the left and a vehicle coming out of that road, they could think that you're turning into the left and start to emerge. So again, it's assessment, isn't it? You've got to look and assess, coming back to this information received and given.
Yeah. Let me just have a flick down. Just see if Lee's coming back. Single carriageway. Yeah, referring to single carriageway. As you say, there are some advantages on dual carriageway. So I would go with what your thoughts were as well there, Lynn. So you've always got to consider that signal that doesn't want to be confusing or misleading. Right, so that's caught up with questions. I think. Okay, if the bus lane is out of time, why can't you keep... if the bus lane's out of time, then yes. I think, were we referring to 24-hour bus lane there, James? Was it you that posed that question?
Yes, I didn't specify, but I specified,
yeah. Yeah, if it's 24-hour bus lane, and crossing back into the bus lane is just a big no-no. We had, when we were training for the Olympics, we had numerous times where, while we were doing the training, some of the drivers were going into the bus lane and we were getting an odd fine or two. So we had to be really careful that if anybody looked as though they were going to move towards the bus lane, it was no, keep out of it, because we did get a couple of fines as we were doing it. So it can pose a big problem. Right, I'll just click it on a slide. Being overtaken. Lost where we are now. There we go. Lynn, being overtaken. I think we've just about covered all this, actually.
Yeah, I think very much so. Just that when you're being overtaken, as we all know as instructors, to advise the candidate not to accelerate if they're being overtaken. You brought up, Ed, about the flashing of the lights. Sometimes when a pupil is being overtaken, that the passing driver will put on their main beams to warn them that they're coming past. So it's something that the pupils need to be aware of, because they might wonder why someone's flashing their lights at them or putting the main beam on as they come past. So it's something for them to be aware of. Make sure that, again, if someone pulls in front of them without giving them due space, that they are willing to drop off and regain that space. Don't hold up a long queue of traffic, especially if you're driving a slow-moving vehicle. So slow-moving vehicles, as we know, tractors should move in to the left to allow people to pass. Yes, they should do.
There was a good case not so long since, wasn't there, where somebody had just been fined quite heavily for this one. I can't remember how many he had behind him, but it was ridiculous. It went on for miles after behind him. And he got, I think it was £700 costs, and he got points on his licence as well. Because it said on that one that he'd passed more than 3 available places to pull up on the left, because I used to be a tractor driver, and I used to be one of those people that everybody hated, especially at this time of year, especially if I was on my combine doing 15 miles an hour. That was flat out maximum we could go, and we're there jiggling down the road at 15 miles an hour. Um, it can get, from our point of view as driving those large machines, it can get quite frustrating that we have to pull off on the busier roads so many times. But yeah, we've got to stick to that no more than 3 spaces, and we've got to pull in if it's reasonable. And there comes into question what's reasonable.
You need a fairly large space to pull in a combine harvester, I would think.
Yeah, and fairly sturdy ground as well, because we weighed 20 ton empty.
Wow.
So I remember having not a stand-up argument. It was a sit-down argument actually between myself and somebody else. A car driver wouldn't go backwards, and they expected me to go backwards down a country lane. And it was in year that we had all the floods, 99, 2000, and the ground was absolutely soaking wet. And there was no way I was pulling off the road. If I'd have taken that off the road, I'd have been stuck. And I was sick of getting stuck that year with the combine. And the driver in front refused to move. So we had a standoff. The police ended up coming out to that one, and the police kindly asked him to reverse back. If he didn't reverse back, he'd be taken away in handcuffs. So at the end of the day, it cost him an awful lot of time. Did that one? So yeah. So just having a look at the questions here. If the bus lane is out of time, so solid white is still okay to cross it or not. If it's out of time, it's okay to cross the solid white line, yes, because you can move into and out of it if it's a free moving lane. If it's out of time, so we have those in Hull, quite a few of those in Hull. Okay.
There's a lot of those in London. Actually. There's a lot in London where they are timed rush hours.
And just very quickly, motorways. The speed and distance, as we've said, that can be so much faster and take so much more time. I think the thing about motorways and dual carriageways I'll bring into this one as well is when you get HGVs overtaking each other, and your mathematician here, James, when we're down to 1 mile an hour or even half a mile an hour difference between the HGVs, that can be very time consuming to get past each other.
The technical answer is how far it takes is forever.
Yes, yeah. Quite. So that speed and distance on motorways, things are coming up so fast. Be very aware of what's coming on behind. The one thing that I tend to do, we have a good stretch of dual carriageway near us. I tend to get learners on there and make good use of certain parts where it does split off to go to the motorways, and we get extra lanes and what have you, and there's cars crossing all over the place. So really interesting that in those sort of areas we can build learners towards getting on motorways using some of these areas if you've got them available. I recognise that there's some areas that are a long way from these sort of roads, so it's not always possible. Signalling on the motorways. One thing that I've got on here is how many flashes of the signal should be given before we move from, let's say we're in lane 1 coming down and we're going to move out to lane 2. How many flashes of the signal would you give before changing lanes?
Personally, I don't think of it as how many flashes. I think of it as being check your mirrors, then put a signal on, and then check your mirrors again to see what the reaction of any other road user, or whether you've missed anything or misassessed anything, which probably would equate to, I don't know, 3 or 4 flashes, but at least. But I don't think of it in terms of signals.
That's exactly what we've sort of come to an agreement with what we were talking about is about 4 flashes minimum if you've assessed your mirrors correctly and given warning, because people need time to see and be aware, don't they? But yeah, that was quite a good discussion. I think you were just going to come in then, Lynn. Go on.
Yeah, I was just saying it's people tend to think of a signal as just putting it on as they move, where it is a warning of intent, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yes.
I'm intending to move to the right, not get out of my way, I am moving.
Yeah. It's about as good as the conversation with that one is like when you sat there moving away from the side of a road on a busy busy area and you've got a line of traffic, would you just put the signal on and barge out? No, you wouldn't. You'd put it on and ask to move out, wouldn't you? Then wait for the gap. Anybody got anything they want to add on motorways? Because I think we're going to come up with motorways as a topic on its own. Have either of you got anything you want to say specifically about motorways? Obviously, be aware of the traffic management systems that we're getting a lot on our motorways now. But either of you?
Going back to your question about how long it takes to pass an LGV, for one LGV to pass another at 1 mile an hour difference, to go from the back to just in front, just literally clear the distance, so bumper to bumper, would be about 60 seconds.
Wow.
That's based on it being 45 foot long. Just a quick calculation.
Quick calculation. Thanks for that, James. Brilliant. Yeah.
You asked.
I did. I like the speed you've actually come up with that there. That was pretty sharp. Lynn, anything to add?
No, I just think LGVs will be covered probably in the next webinar.
Yeah. So that brings us to a close. I'm just going to have a quick flick through, see if there's any there. I used five flashes from Peter Gent. He uses 5. Yeah, so 4, 5. Yeah, that's sort of in line with what we were thinking there. So brilliant. So thank you for listening to us tonight. Hope you've all enjoyed the webinar. This webinar, as I say, will go on the website. If you want to go onto the website, it's www.adinjc.org.uk, and you can see the video, which will be on there from hopefully tomorrow night. If I get it all converted tonight, it takes a while to convert, and I'll get it up there for everybody to see and maybe review those figures. Yeah. So next webinar, as we were sort of talking there, I've put HGV there, my mistake, it should be LGV. LGV platooning on the 27th of September, Tuesday 27th. That's our possible one for next time. If not, I think we might actually come back with motorways or something like that, but there will be a topic for the 27th of September at 8 o'clock. So that's it from all of us. Good night and thank you for attending. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.